Tansei, welcome to Metis Minute, your source for Metis news in Region 7. Tansei, I am your host, Samantha Loney. I am back with another Metis Minute to talk to you about a specific issue that is facing some of our citizens. I am going to be doing a series of videos called Citizen Concerns. That is where a citizen can reach out to me and talk to me about an issue that is going on in the community that they think more people should know about. So I'm asking you, citizens, to submit your stories for me by leaving a comment in this video. You can DM me on Facebook as well, Samantha Loney, or you could email metisandmeprogram@gmail.com. Let me know what stories you want to hear, and we will take a Metis Minute to discuss them with you. Today, we sat down with Marie Francis, a concerned citizen who wanted to talk to us about the affordable housing that we're building here in the Métis Nation of Ontario. We previously did a story about the housing that is being built in Midland, and we went through our winter survival kits for people who are unhoused and find themselves living on the street. We'll have a link to that video at the end of the episode, so be sure to check that out. But today we sat down with Marie Francis. Marie is a Region 7 citizen who wanted to talk to us about accessible housing. Now, what does accessible housing mean? Usually when we talk about housing and the crisis that we're currently facing, we talk about the expenses and the money that everybody is struggling to come up with to pay for these astounding rental prices. And let's face it, if you're a millennial, you're probably thinking you're never going to be able to afford a house. And while that issue of affordable housing is important, what we wanted to do was dive into something that maybe not a lot of people are thinking of, and that is accessible housing. If you're living with a physical or mental disability, some of these housing solutions might have you feeling a little left out. We are at a point in M&O history where we are going to be able to design the Métis Nation that we want to see. Marie wanted to remind me and every other Métis citizen that as we build our Métis Nation, we don't forget about people with physical disabilities, our elders, and anyone who might be having trouble accessing physical spaces due to these colonial designs that we've all put in place. We want to make sure we're building a Métis Nation that is accessible to all. So please enjoy the following interview for Citizens Concerns. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and why this accessibility issue is so important to you?
Okay, so my name is Marie Francis. I'm from the Labatt, Leduc, and Dunsum family lines. I live in Barrie, and I'm part of the Region 7 and the Barrie South Simcoe Council. I'm what's called an ambulatory wheelchair user. So I walk with a cane and crutches sometimes, but a lot of times I enjoy using my chair to get around. I find it helps me keep up with my two kids, and I'm a pretty active person, so that's how I like to get around. So being able to get into all the spaces in the community is really, really important to me, especially when I'm having a flare or a more difficult day. I don't want where I can go to depend on, how I'm feeling. I want to be able to access the whole community. So that's pretty important to me.
What does accessible housing actually mean?
Yeah, I was thinking about that the other day, actually. We were doing a project at school on breastfeeding, actually, and it was was neat. Like I breastfed both my kids, and we were talking about like anticipating the needs of mothers in different spaces. And I thought, you know what, that's a really neat parallel as well for disability. Like it's about being anticipated and being welcomed in different spaces. So when we design a space with less barriers, we're able to welcome more people into it. We're anticipating people's needs, and we're physically building a better community.
The federal government released their housing plan to build 4 million housing units by 2031. I read that document, and I think they were using the term affordable housing interchangeably with accessibility, because I did not see a lot in there about the physical accessibility of these housing units.
Yeah, I did look over that document. I did notice that there was mention of involving different Indigenous groups in there, and Metis was specifically mentioned. And so I do think that there are lots of opportunities for us there. So I think that's an awesome thing. I did also notice the lack of stuff on access, and I think that's, I'm hoping that is not going to be missed in the implementation, because I think that access is about looking to the future, and I think it would be incredibly unwise to continue on our current trajectory in Canada of producing housing that doesn't meet the needs of our people. We already have a huge amount of housing stock that is inaccessible. We don't need more inaccessible housing. The future is accessibility. It's about being able to have, someone who breaks their hip go home instead of having to go into long-term care. It's about having those transitions in life be made easier. We already have so much inaccessible housing. It would be so unwise not to build basic accessibility into any new housing stock in Canada. That's just adding, when we fail to do that, we're just adding to the deficit that we already have.
Do you think the government was maybe using affordable housing and accessibility interchangeably?
Yes, I think the accessibility they were often referring to was about in terms of being able to get into the housing market and not being able to physically get into the house. But I think those are both super critical components, and I think too when we look at that, it's about both. It's about being able to get into the market, and it's about being able to get into the house.
How do affordable housing and accessible housing go together?
I think at this point, I think affordable. I think affordable maybe used to be thought of more as a niche issue, but I would suggest, perhaps a little boldly, that for my generation, so for millennials, and for those younger than us, for a lot of us, the way we're doing housing in Canada has failed us. A lot of people cannot get into the housing market. Affordability is a huge issue. It's very, very hard for my generation to find a place to live, to rent, to raise a family. A lot of people aren't having families because of this. And so I think affordability is just a housing issue. Like that's for almost everyone is struggling. And so I think that's huge. And I think accessibility is the same. I think we're talking about affordability. We're talking about almost everyone. And I think we have to look at accessibility the same way, that it's not just those people let's make them a couple of units on the ground floor. I think we want to look at this in terms of like, how do we conceptualize community? Who belongs? How are we going to manage that? And I think the answer is that everyone belongs, and we want to foster and physically create a community that reflects, particularly for us Métis people, that reflects our values of family. So we have more intergenerational living than other cultural communities do, and some other cultures do, and I think we can build housing where, if, something happens, people can come and live together. Grandma can come and visit for Christmas, or, Prepare can come and live with his children if something happens. I think we want to create housing where the moment something goes wrong, you get in an automobile accident, it's not a crisis. I think everyone, whether they're aware of that or not, needs accessible housing, wants accessible housing. You don't want to have, my mayor show up for Christmas and, say, oh, darn it, where'd we put the plywood? We've got to get a ramp up here. I guess maybe you can just sit on the driveway and we'll bring you out some mashed potatoes. I don't think that's the culture we're trying to create. I think we want to have people anticipated, welcome, and integrated into whatever we do.
So we talked about affordability and accessibility. When we talk about that, we're talking about some people who might not have the financial means to access housing or pay these high rental prices. A lot of these people might be on ODSP or have a fixed income. Maybe want to talk about how this accessible and affordable housing works in terms of that and some of the issues that these citizens might be facing.
Yeah, I think I think we definitely need something for the majority of people at this point. But I think especially when you look at people who are on ODSP, the payment is appallingly low for housing, especially when you look at the huge cost of renting a place. And so what you end up having is people who are living in completely inaccessible housing. And in really, really unfortunate situations. And these are people that we really need to support. These are people who oftentimes have, been huge parts of our community, who have, women in particular. A lot of times they don't have the same employment history as men, because they've taken time off to have children. They oftentimes work in lower paying jobs. And so when you become older as a woman, when you're retired, your pension it may not cover, your ideal spot to live. And what happens sometimes, which is really, really unfortunate, and I think we want to make sure we aren't replicating these systems, is you wind up with situations where, as particularly a woman's small pension or income is not keeping pace with inflation, and when she doesn't have, she doesn't own where she's renting, she'll end up having to continue to move into a worse and worse setting because that's all that she can afford. And so you end up a lot of times, especially as a woman ages, and this obviously happens to men as well, but it is particularly acute in women because of their lower incomes. They end up in physically inaccessible buildings that they can no longer leave. Their mobility gets worse and worse, and they can no longer go down, the 7 steps to the room in the basement apartment, and they become essentially prisoners of their own house. And so that's really unfortunate, but that is a really big reality for a lot of people. And so every time that we build a house that is profoundly inaccessible, we build in these future barriers. We're not going to be able to solve everything, but the more that we can do to make things easy to retrofit, to make, for example, accessory dwelling units. Those are a beautiful, amazing option that can be made super accessible. So if you're going to put a little apartment in your garage, wow, that's a great moment to do something. You've got level entry already built in. You can build a bathroom. You can make a rental space that is going to be deeply accessible for someone. The same with a standalone accessory dwelling unit in your backyard. A lot of those are just built on slabs. They can be made deeply, deeply accessible. So one of my big hopes is that this pre-designed housing thing that's supposed to come out of the federal government will contain, I would like to see all, but certainly all visitable housing, but deeply accessible housing, especially in these particular niches which lend themselves to it so beautifully. So I think that when we're looking at particularly at lower income, at people on ODSP, at people on fixed incomes, these are opportunities where how we design our building codes, how we design our infrastructure can make a really significant difference. And even if it's not for the person who you originally designed it for, I think that simply by having things like accessory dwelling units, apartments and garages, these sorts of things, making them as accessible as possible is going to benefit these members of the community, because they will have these spaces. I think we need to have way bigger answers than just accessory accessory dwelling units, and apartments and garages. But they're a beautiful opportunity to create more accessible housing while we continue to work on other ways of building that's going to work out.
A lot of people might not have a physical disability, so they might not think that this housing accessibility issue is affecting them. What do you say to those people about how we design these units for people who may need them in the future?
I think that as we look towards self-governance as a people, we have a beautiful, beautiful opportunity to make choices. I think, as I mentioned, I think that there are a lot of things. There are a lot of things that are wonderful about Canada, but there are a lot of things that I think we don't want to replicate. I think we want to take a moment and pause and think, what do we want to see in what we physically build, in what we socially build, in what we construct as we move forward towards self-governance. And I don't know that we want to replicate housing that only works for a small subset of the population at a certain time in their life, as long as they don't get into an accident. I mean, that just seems, I don't know why we've chosen to build every single house with a step up to the front door. I don't understand why that's our default in Canada. It really doesn't make a lot of sense. But I don't think that's something that we need to replicate in anything that we build. And I think in anything that's built across Canada in the future, I think we really want to look at what we're saying with our architecture, what we're saying with our design, and whether that reflects the lived experiences of our people. The cost of building something that is moderately accessible, so we might call this visitable. So what I'm talking about is someone calls up my kid and says, hi, I want to come over to play. I call back the mom and I say, yeah, like, let's come over. I'll come on over, we'll visit together. I'll bring my daughter over, she's just a little girl, so a lot of times I like to do the first visit. I can come over, I can wheel up into your house. There's a bathroom on the main floor that I can use. So we've got this just basic, I can enter the door, there's a bathroom there. And another thing that's oftentimes important when we're talking about a visitable house is having a room that can be used as a bedroom, so that if, your son plays football, he, tears his ACL, he's 300 pounds, he's, coming home from the emergency room on a lot of heavy duty pain medication, you can, put him on an office chair and roll him in your front door, and there's, a spot that he can sleep for a bit until he's well enough to go back upstairs to where his room is. So that's really basic visitability, which I think should be built into every house, because we never know what the future is going to bring. But we do know it's very likely to bring some level of disability into our lives. Like that is almost guaranteed. So I think we want to have that basic thing in. There's the cost of landscaping the front yard a little bit differently to eliminate that front step, the cost of having the doors wide enough to let a wheelchair through. These things are not significant when they're done at the construction phase, when they're done at the design phase. When you have to add them in later, you're looking at a lot of costs, you're looking at a lot of disruption at a moment in your life where you really don't need that. So I think this is creative. This is stuff we need to be creative about, but this is not stuff that there are huge real barriers there. Like, we're not looking at huge costs. We're not looking at there's really, to me, there's really no good reason not to do it.
You talked a bit about keeping our Métis values in mind while we're building these new affordable housing units. We haven't quite built the units in Midland yet, so how do we as a community look forward in creating these units that align with our Métis values?
So I think the most challenging form of housing to make accessible probably is the townhouse. And I know that that's probably going to be a significant part of whichever builds we do. So I think if we can look at some basic universal design principles, at being able to have this entry, this washroom on the main floor, that's great. And then what do we do for the rest of it? Some easy techniques are, for example, stacking closets, so that you've got, a coat closet and then a closet upstairs. They both align. If in the future someone moves in, something happens, and you need a lift, you've already got the infrastructure in the wall if you build it in initially. And so it's much easier to retrofit with a lift. We don't need really, really deep accessibility in every house, because the truth is, like, everyone's needs are a bit different. But we can build with the future in mind, and we can build to make things much easier to change as time goes on. We need to make the bathroom big enough to get a wheelchair in and be able to rotate it. We want to have the floor built to be able to have the space to put in a roll-in shower. We don't always need to start with these things. We can start with other things, but we want to be able to have at least the physical space and the setup to do that. And I think it's so important, that we really, really look at what we're doing, that we're not replicating systems that aren't working, that we're stopping, we're orienting ourselves to values of family, of community, of honoring our elders and giving them a place within our community. I don't think we want to begin, that segregation within our own community where, there are only certain spots for certain people. I think we want to keep things as welcoming as possible. And I think it's especially for me, a big thing is our elders. I remember when my papa got sick, it became hard for him to visit a lot of places, and that was a huge loss. So I think we want to make sure that we're not pushing people out of our communities, out of our homes through poor design. I think we can do better as a people.
You talked a bit about self-government and Bill C-53, and as that gets closer to happening, what are your hopes and dreams for the Métis Nation of Ontario as we start to build our self-government?
I think something that's going to be really important, and this is not for built environment, but this is for governance. I really, this is something that I've been involved with within other government structures, has been an accessibility advisory committee. I would really recommend something like that to help guide our direction. I think we had talked a bit about different possibilities and dreams for how we could do this, and we talked about the possibility of having we've got like a women's rep, we've got veterans, we've got youth. We do a person for disability. And I would suggest, I think disability is a huge issue, and I think it's super important, but I would suggest that more of a committee format might work a bit better, because disability is so diverse. There's my experience of disability as a physically disabled woman. There's, my son's experience of disability as a child with autism. There are people who are visually impaired, people who are deaf, people who are hard of hearing. There is so much diversity. I think that having a committee and perhaps having the committee report to council or act as sort of an equivalent to a single representative, that might be the most effective way to really try to channel the diversity of the disability community and to ensure that we are not creating structural barriers as we move forward in this huge monumental moment. Because once you build in a barrier and begin to build on top of it layer after layer, it gets harder and harder to remove those initial barriers. So we have a really amazing, beautiful moment where we can really start to structure things so that we're not building in, or we're building in fewer barriers. There will always be barriers, there will always be challenges. Access is always going to be negotiated and redesigned and recreated, and that's totally to be expected. But we want to just try to hit the ground running and try to build in as few barriers as possible.
So is it safe to say that you support an accessibility committee at the PCMNO level?
Yeah, I think that there are. I think that's something that should be looked into.
The AODA, or the Ontarians with Disabilities Act, aims to make Ontario more accessible by 2025, which is right around the corner. How do you think we are at reaching our goal of 2025?
I remember when the AODA was first talked about, and I remember it was so far in the future. I think it was like around, I think it was like close to like 20 years in the future. And it was so far away. So, of course, we had all the time in the world to get there. And now that the clock is ticking down, and there's no way we're going to be there. And that's too bad. But I think we have to keep moving forward. I think we want to look at deep accessibility. We want to look at, I've been commuting to Toronto to go to school. And one of the issues is the elevators are oftentimes down there. So we want to look at, okay, we know elevators are going to break. Like, that's not news to anyone. Let's build in some redundancy instead of just saying, and the whole station's down, so too bad if you have a wheelchair and you want to go there. I think, there's so many levels. It's not just, can we find some way to stop this person in this building? It's, can we have deep levels of accessibility? And some of that's going to take a really long time. But I think the important thing is to work with some of these assumptions that people with disabilities belong everywhere, that we are integral parts of the community, and that we need to be anticipated in all spaces, that it's not an other problem, that we all belong, and that we want to make sure that we're all advocating for these really, really basic things, physical access in all spaces, because our grandparents belong. People who have various disabilities belong. People who've had accidents belong. We all belong. And I think if we start with belonging being, a central tenet of whatever we do, then the rest will come together. But I think if we just anticipate that belonging as being critical, we'll be able to find ways to ensure that people have that. I think, I just really, really think we have an incredible moment as a nation, where we're hopefully right on the cusp of the self-governance. We've got, I think hopefully there's going to be a lot of funding for housing, for building things, and I think if we can design in our values, if we can stop, look at what's going on, look at what has worked for other nations, for our country, and what hasn't worked, and say, okay, we have a lot of examples of things we will and will not do. how are we going to create solutions that reflect our values? And I think if we can do that, we're well on our way.
Merci to Marie Francis for sitting down with me today to discuss accessible housing. A reminder that as we build our self-government, we have the ability to design a nation that is accessible for all. The Métis Nation of Ontario has a few programs in place to help citizens who are having trouble accessing affordable and safe housing. They have an emergency repair program where you may be eligible to receive funds to help with emergency repairs in your home. They also have a first-time homebuyers mortgage assistance program where they can help you purchase your first home. They also have programs that are available to help assist citizens who are transitioning to long-term care. If you are interested in any of these services, contact your local council, or you can go to the MNO's website and learn more. We know that there are currently citizens who are unhoused and living on the street. As temperatures warm up, we can't forget that the unhoused still have struggles and issues with living on the street. I wanted to go through one of our summer street bags to make sure citizens know what is available to them if they should find themselves unhoused in the near future. Or if you currently know anyone living on the street who could use these bags. You can contact your local Métis Council office to find out how you can get your hands on one of these bags that could potentially help save someone's life, or at least make it a little easier. Of course, we have the Métis Nation of Ontario bag. First, we have a pair of socks inside the bag. Second, we have a hat, which is great to help protect you from the heat of the sun, which you are going to need in these Ontario summers. Next, we have this Métis Nation of Ontario first aid kit. We have this brush and grooming kit. We have a Métis Nation of Ontario water bottle and thermos. Of course, we have some wipes in here, and we have a blanket, a toothbrush, some lip balm, deodorant, some sunscreen, SPF 27, of course, some toothpaste, Frosty Mint, some Métis Nation of Ontario hand sanitizer. Well, there you have it, folks. The Métis Nation of Ontario's summer street bag. We'd like to thank you for taking the time to sit down with us today and learn more about accessible housing, affordable housing, and how we can help those who are currently unhoused. Merci for watching, and we'll see you down the river.